Welcome to Geeks and Grounds, a monthly game club where we play games and brew a good conversation together. My name is Jenny Wyndham.
And I'm Joel Thomas.
And we are finishing up OneShot's Solstice DLC today. I'm so pumped. This
The
has
one
been
shot, two shot.
the one-shot, two-shot, yep. Because go figure, the game titled One Shot. Actually, if you would like to take it, there's another opportunity. But before we do that, first, thank you for tuning in and listening. Thank you for everyone who's left reviews on iTunes and Spotify, rated us on Spotify. We really appreciate it and encourage you to continue to do so if you are able to and would like to. And yeah, I guess, how are you doing today, Joel?
You know, I'm running on very little sleep, and I think I'm up to my 6th cup of coffee. So we are very deep into the grounds side of Geeks and
My
Grounds today.
gosh. I feel like I should see your camera just shaking, even like
Just straight buzzing,
just yeah.
baby.
I wish I realized I'm like, I did not have coffee today, and I kind of wish I did because I also feel very like run into the grounds part of the Geeks and Grounds. But no. I'm ready for the weekend, is just all I have to say.
Got it. So like I'm in the grounds, like coffee grounds. You're in the ground, like run into the ground,
Yeah.
and we're both geeks, and so we're gonna bring the energy for you all today.
Exactly. We really dedicated ourselves to the name this time around. Um, but yeah, this is the last podcast of the new of this game, our first game of the new year. What a convoluted like celebratory title, but
Mm.
I was just thinking it's just what a awesome way to start the new year. We were just talking right before the podcast started recording. This has been a really good game for discussion, and what a just a great way to kick off 2024.
We got some heat for today, y'all. We got a
Yeah.
lot to talk about.
Oh
This
yeah.
game, the ending is absolutely wild, and I cannot wait to dig into it with you.
Mm-hmm. Before we dig into it, though, as always, we need to stop by the pastry case just to see what's going on in the world of games, just in general. And this week, and I guess technically last weekend, but this week, a game has really hit the industry by storm. And while I know the discourse has been live and well, and perhaps folks are a little tired of hearing about it by now since this podcast is recorded in the second half of the week, I thought it would be remiss if we didn't at least casually touch upon the topic of Pal World, a very new game that came out. So I guess, Joel, have you heard of Pal World?
You know, it's one of those things where like I saw previews for it, was it like maybe 2 years ago, and I got like really excited by the audacity of the premise, and I was like, this
Mm-hmm.
could be really fun, and forgot the title, didn't even know how to look it up, and just didn't know what to expect, and
Mm-hmm.
I saw some videos over the last week, and I was like, wow, this looks like a lot of fun. And then you clued me into some of the interesting controversy around this. I'm like, well, probably going to be skipping this one. So yeah, get into it. Like, what's going on with this game?
All right. So for some folks who may not be super into following sort of what's going on in discourse with the capital D, I would suppose. Pal World is a game that released on January 18th by the developer Pocket Pair. It's also self-published by Pocket Pair. And the Steam description just says fight, farm, build, and work alongside mysterious creatures called pals in this completely new multiplayer open world survival and crafting game. Now, the trailer for this game, I think the first time, maybe it was a reveal, I'm not entirely sure, but the first time I saw the game was at, I think it was the Game Awards or Summer Game Fest a
Mm.
couple years ago. And the trailer came out, and initially I was like, oh, this looks like it could be very, very cute. And then really it just showed essentially what looked like to be Pokemon, but like monster creatures
Mhm.
with guns. And for me, that instantly becomes like, I'm just not a person who enjoys that kind of gameplay. That's just not what I go to games for. This is like, oh, this is probably not for me. And I also really specifically remember in that trailer, there's a scene of like or not Pokemon, like pals in a manufacturing factory line, sadly, like assembling, I think it was guns or weapons. And I remember at that time seeing the trailer thinking just like, what is this? Like, are you supposed to be sort of the Team Rocket of this world? Is it supposed to be a play on like sort of the critiques that people have of Pokemon? Like, what is the story going to be?
Hmm.
Or is it just going to be like kind of a meme game? And then I really just forgot about it until it launched just a few days ago. How to begin? There are layers and layers upon just conversation that we could have about this game. And I said in another podcast that I'm in, we could do an entire podcast series delving into each of these layers. And we're not going to do that here because that's not necessarily the point. But there's talk of AI, potential A or alleged potential, I don't know what the legal term is, but possible AI use in either the concepting or the development of the game. There's talk of people, there's talk of what does it mean to plagiarize? What does copyright mean? What does it look like in this day and age where there is the potential to use AI? Um, I think less of a conversation, but something I'm really interested in is sort of what are the mechanics and like sort of the like with the content of the game, I guess. Like, is it
Mm-hmm.
a substantial game? Is this a meme game? What is this game encouraging players to do? And so there's just a lot to dive into with this. I'm curious, I guess, did you delve into any of it after I kind of was like, hey, have you heard about Pal World and what's going on?
I have not gone into it in detail. I did see something on TikTok that was like not even related to those things. Maybe it's kind of connected to the AI thing, but it was like
Mhm.
um some like text to speech renderer that they had used instead of paying a
Mm.
voice actor or something like that.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
think it was Power World that this was for, but like I I don't understand this movement, this motion that we're seeing in the industry right now. That's like, we're going to take all of the like creative, artistic, interesting parts of video games and we're going to try and like smash them down to their like smallest component pieces. And that's what we're going to sell because we think it's going to be cheaper or whatever. Because, like, obviously, the financial driver here. But what's wild to me with this one, just like kind of based on like your descriptions and like some of the things that we're seeing, is like it's not even just that. Like the premise itself is built on faulty ground. And like guns plus Pokemon is not a new concept. That's what Digimon is. Like
Yeah.
guns plus Pokemon is already a thing. I thought this was gonna be like a wild, like almost Metalocalypse level, like audacious type of experience, but it's like assembly line gun manufacturing. Like that's not fun.
Yeah.
That's
Or maybe it was like some sort of I guess in my head I was assuming it was guns, but maybe they're manufacturing something else. I'm not sure. but,
I don't know
but
that it
still.
super
Fact.
matters.
Yeah, I
Like,
was like, it's still a factory line situation, which is
mhm.
I think for me, and since I guess this has all gone down. The Game Freak, the Pokemon company, did issue a statement actually this morning, and they did say that they will be investigating further and pursuing action if they were to find something.
Mm.
Um, so, I think legally, what's going to come out is going to come out. I'm more concerned in terms of like how this may impact like the legal repercussions moving forward. Like how will this impact the industry? How will this impact the manufacturing of games? Like what precedents will be set
Mm.
because we don't have a precedence for what happens if someone develops a game using this technology. So I think that's going to be really interesting. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not even going to pretend to understand the nuances of like copyright and fair use in this situation because I already know it's really complex. Like things like parody and satire. I've seen a lot of people talking about like, oh, but Pal World's parody, so it's fine. And I'm like, I don't know if I would call it
I
parody
don't think
because it's
so.
not. Yeah, what is the commentary that it is adding?
Yeah.
It's like I I'm no lawyer, but I don't think it quite fits that definition. But I do think it's going to be a really interesting case to follow, depending on what ends up happening legally.
This could be a straw for the camel's back in some ways, and with AI gen stuff just in general. Like, I remember when some of these like image generators came out and people were really excited, and then it was like, oh, but this has been trained on like artists' work. One of the interesting threads of commentary was like, organizations like Disney might be the ones to actually help us in this situation because they don't want
Mm,
their IP being used to train these models and generate these
right.
images. And so it was like, well, what would spark them to do something? And it like this Nintendo story is exactly the kind of thing where it's like they bring a lawsuit that says like this is infringement on our IP, and like here's like the similarities, whatever. Then it falls to the other company to show that it wasn't right.
Hmm.
And to do that and say, well, we actually did use AI for this stuff, then the question is like, well, what's your AI being trained on? Like, what's it modeled after? It's like, well, maybe it's a generative, like a baseline AI. I have no idea. I have no idea. This
Yeah.
is all like just speculation at this point. But like, if that is the case, that they did use AI and they go to court and they're like, well, we used AI, then the question is, well, is your AI pulling from Pokemon as a source for what it's being trained on? And
Hmm.
90 plus percent AI modeling solutions at this point are black box. You
I was gonna
cannot
say,
document where it's coming from.
yeah,
So,
and I think perhaps even if they wanted to, you couldn't, depending on, again, I'm also not an AI expert, but like I imagine with the amount of information that they need to put in to make AI really functional and usable in that way, it's like the mass amount of data is
mhm.
far more than a person or an even software could probably parse through in a reasonable amount of time. So yeah, I think the implications for this just legally moving forward are really interesting. Um, I think just as a game, it does not hold interest to me personally. I think there's a lot going for it though. I mean, to be very honest and clear, it is doing outstanding. It sold 7 million copies in like the first 5-ish days or so, which is
Mhm. Mhm.
outrageously huge. Like mind-boggling numbers. It beat Just Chatting on the Twitch like browse. You could Just Chatting for folks who don't know is basically the number one Twitch category. Just usually all the time, it's like up there with I don't know Counter Strike and like League. These are games that are almost never toppled from like the top 3 to 5 places on Twitch. Palworld was number one for a little bit. So it goes to show you this is a game that is resonating with people, that is holding the interest, at least for now. Because it's a
Mm.
survival game, the mechanics do seem engaging enough that there's like a hook that will keep you exploring and wanting more. Pokemon is a huge franchise. And I think the tagline, even of Pokemon with guns, is enough to at least get people to want to explore and see what it looks like. I
Yeah.
mean, I've been watching streams just to see how it plays. So it's like, I'm not going to knock the like concept necessarily or like the success. I guess I'm not going to knock the success that they've found. Um, I just am curious to see about the longevity now that they have found this massive audience. Um, yeah.
I will just throw this out there as like a point of inspiration. We have a lot of digital artists in our community,
Hmm.
and I did see that Nightshade is now available for consumer use. Nightshade is like a layering that you can add to your digital art so that it kind of poisons AI systems that try to use it as a part of their model
Mm-hmm.
base. So if you're a digital artist, check out, I think it's called Nightshade. It will be an interesting area of exploration, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the last interesting thing or the thing that got me thinking, you touched on this and I want to highlight it because I think it's a really astute observation, is this movement in games towards or it's not an entire movement. I would say there is this growing trend of genre mashups that
Mm,
I
mhm.
really appreciate. Um, so seeing this Pal World being like Pokemon meets Breath of the Wild meets Ark Survival meets,
Mm,
Fortnite building. I don't know. It's just like you see all of these things that are super hooky that you do. You're like, as a player, wouldn't it be kind of cool to have all this together? Um, and there's a part of me that's like very excited by, hey, we're in a time period in which these genre blends are being encouraged. Like I think of Cult of the Lamb, for example,
oh,
where like
yeah.
that's a great example of this like rock solid genre blend. I think of Dave the Diver. I had my own little issues with Dave the Diver, but that game, my goodness, that game played so well. And so I'm not necessarily apprehensive about the mashups themselves and exploration of that. Like, I also think ultimately, if you're going to take the best parts of every single game, you're still going to have to make like a game with a singular vision that still is good. You can't just mishmash Franken game yourself to success.
Mhm.
But I think what I'm really interested and concerned about is this hyper capitalistic like marketing of
Yes.
nostalgia in particular.
Yes.
I think what really makes me feel a little bit icky about Pal World is it knows the nostalgia Pokemon has, and it is utilizing that in a very hyper, like obviously hyper capitalistic way. And
Mhm.
that's what makes me feel scummy. It's the same with Disney Dreamlight Valley. And I know we have a lot of people who love Disney Dreamlight Valley in like this community and everywhere. And like, again, I don't knock that. But for me, it's a really interesting progression that we're seeing where these companies are like, we're going to take something and like market, like hone it to the max in terms of what we think is going to get the endorphins just going
Mm.
with nostalgia, with the loop. And it feels different than when, like, I don't know, when just a general studio does it. And I know it's one of those, if I see it, I feel it, it's like, I know that's not good, but there's something there that I'm just like, we're moving towards this hyper marketing focused, hyper capitalistic, hyper data driven
Mm.
design that I'm like not excited to see.
Let's not let our AAA friends off the hook either. Like, thinking about, let's use Pokemon itself as an example. The last several game releases that they have been kind of abysmal in terms of
Mhm.
gameplay quality, with like having to have major
Absolutely.
patches immediately following. And it's the same thing. It's like they know like these games are so nostalgic and have such a strong consumer base. It's like it's okay if our game is not like totally up to snuff at launch. It's okay, people are going to buy it anyway. And like
Mhm.
to your point about like that kind of hyper capitalistic influence, I think that's a really powerful, it's a powerful motivator for some of these companies, and it's a really good
Yeah.
call out, Jenny.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's tough because again, I'm like you where I'm so excited for every Pokemon launch and the last few I have been so disappointed. um,
Mhm.
and I think it is smart of Pal World to play with that. It is smart. Um if you want to make money, that's a way to do it. And I understand we live in a society and you do got to make money. I mean, again, 7
Yeah.
million copies. I'd love to make that kind of money if I ever develop,
Mm.
like if Spirit Swap sold and made 7, I would just immediately retire. It would be great. Um, but yeah, I think there's this intentionality that it seems like there's this disconnect, and I don't know who Pal World is for. Where at least when I play Pokemon, I feel like I kind of know who they make Pokemon for generally.
Mm,
Um,
mhm. Interesting.
and so I think that's where for me, and yeah, we could talk about this a long time, but I just think this is a really interesting case to look at, and I'm very excited to just see what happens with it and observe just what comes of it.
And we'll be here to tell
we'll
you what's next.
we'll be here. Uh, what's next, though?
Ooh.
Speaking of what's next, is Steam Next Fest. This is just a small little like, hey, something cool is happening. Um, February 5th through the 12th. Yes. Steam Next Fest is a go. I've been getting inbox just requests because all these demos are getting ready to come out. So, what I would love to do, because we've done this for I think every Next Fest, nearly every Next Fest, is as a community, we'll create a submission form. If you would like to share some of your favorite demos, feel free, put that in the form, put it in the Discord. And we'll share out your favorite demos and what you thought of them, and we'll absolutely be playing demos through the week and sharing our own faves. So I wanted to highlight that, let you get prepped, get ready. If you're like me, I just go through and download like 50 demos and I just try to get through as many as possible. So yeah, very excited for that.
Well, I have jury duty that week, so now I have something to do while I'm waiting for my number to be
Yes.
called.
Oh my gosh, best week for jury duty. Heck yes.
Heck yeah.
And I wanted to shout out just one quick bit of news from Xbox, just highlighting indie games. We're all about that here. ID at Xbox, they just announced a curative program, like curation program, I guess, for called Indie Selects for the Xbox, where weekly their team is actually going to try to curate indie games and really point people to hidden gems, games that they may not discover that are on their platform. Um, I thought that was really cool. I'm always up for curation, especially of indies,
Mm,
and really excited to see Xbox continuing to at least try to find ways to bolster indies on their platform. I think all of the sort of the big three, Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, they all do different things. They all try to promote indies. I do think Xbox, in terms of just like consistency and sort of across multiple levels, they do perhaps some of the strongest work
mm.
in promoting indies. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this turns out.
Well, one thing to consider is that it sounds like they're kind of trying to move into our turf, and maybe we need to send a cease and desist letter to Microsoft.
Or we can just be like, hey, if you want us to come and we could do a Indie Selects Geeks and Grounds edition. Yeah, if anyone at Xbox would like to give us a call, that'd be wonderful. I'd love to do that.
This episode is called Geeks and Grounds Sells Out.
When I said 7 million copies, I'm here for the money. Here we go. No.
That's
No,
very good.
yeah, I think honestly that was my first thought. I actually saw the tweet that announced this and instantly sent it to like my work chat and with Wholesome Games, the work we do, and I was like, how can we do this? I think it's really exciting. And
Yeah,
I think the
totally.
one thing is, just as someone who, like, with many people do things on a weekly basis, right? Like even writing the newsletters for Geeks and Grounds on a weekly basis, it's one of those things where I'm like, that's a lot of work. Curation is a lot of work, so I'm very curious to
Mhm.
see um how they keep it up. I hope they keep it up, and if they end up bringing in outside sources to help supplement, which I think would be wise of them. I am biased because I'm hoping we could be one of
Are
them
we an
someday.
outside source?
I would hope
Ooh.
so. But yeah, it's
Get
pretty
it. Get
cool.
in the comments. Tag Microsoft. Let them know
Tag
what's up.
Xbox. Say, please. I only want indie selects from Geeks and Grounds. Then we can get that Xbox money.
We are the selection algorithm.
Yeah.
Oh
Wow.
man, very funny.
Uh, so yeah, that's it for the indie news. What have you been up to though? What are some fun things that you've been just reading, watching, listening to?
I'm gonna be real quick today because there is so much to talk about with one shot, two shot, red shot, blue shot.
Hmm.
Um, if y'all are not on the Percy Jackson and the Olympians train right now on the new series that's come out, I am loving it. It is just scratching that like middle grades book itch, that YA itch.
Hmm.
The kid that's playing Percy is a fantastic actor, and I'm really, really vibing with it. So would recommend. I gotta say, you all know I'm still playing Baldur's Gate 3. I still haven't finished my first run. Where I am right now is I'm like kind of wrapping up all of the main characters' quests before I finish the big main quest thing. And the twists in this final act of the story, I literally was like standing up screaming at my game a couple of nights ago with some of these twists. So like if you're really into this game, you're like, it's kind of like linear and pretty straightforward. No, it ain't. Like there is some really interesting story twists and turns, especially in Act 3, that I
Hmm.
think are really like keeping me engaged.
Wow.
Um, and I actually started a new book called An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. It's from like 2018.
Okay.
Um, and it is kind of exploring online culture in a way. It's like a
Mm.
young woman who is working kind of as a designer, fresh out of art school for a startup. And she finds this statue, this weird statue in New York. And she and her friend post a YouTube video about it, and it goes super mega viral, and it's kind of about her
Huh.
dealing with the implications of what it means to like have this kind of corner of celebrity, and the implications on her life and lifestyle. And it has been a really enjoyable, pretty fast read. So so far really enjoying it.
Awesome. Is it relatively like is it a weekend read? Like could you get through it relatively quickly, do you think, or is it a
You
bit
could get
hefty?
through it relatively quickly, Jenny. Jenny's an incredibly rapid reader. You'd be able to tackle this thing in a day. For a person like me who reads for maybe like 15 to 20, maybe 30 minutes a night, it's going to take me probably like 3, 4 weeks to get through.
Okay. I mean, that's pretty cool. I have been very slowly getting through a book that his brother wrote, John Green. I don't know if you've read this one. It's called The
Anthropocene
Anthropocene
reviewed.
Reviewed. I've
Ugh.
been working my way through it audiobook style because I'll listen to it on my walks. So that's why it's taking a decent amount of time, but I like it because it's forcing me to sort of settle with it versus sort of reading quickly through it as I would maybe a non or a fiction story. I think I
Mm.
appreciate nonfiction in audio form personally.
You are the third person to tell me, after I've told them I'm reading a Hank Green book, to tell me they are reading Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green
Wow.
in the last week.
Dang. Oh my gosh.
So you're riding the zeitgeist wave.
Didn't
There's
even know
for those
it.
of you who
Yeah.
are not familiar with that book, like in addition to the book and audiobook, there is a podcast that is centered on the book that John Green
Mhm.
hosts and does. And if you are looking for a book, I haven't read it, but I've watched a lot of like the video clips and things from it
Yeah.
online. If you're looking for a book that is going to make you feel like just a degree better about humanity and the human condition, and these are pretty hopeless times right now, I gotta say,
Yeah.
this seems like the book for you in this moment. So are you like, is it giving you some of that like uplifting feeling as you're going through it?
It does. And what I appreciate the most is that while at sometimes it can step into a little bit of the cheese where you're just
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah, I know you're trying to be like super contemplative and like uplifting here. I think as a whole that cheese works really well, and
Mm,
I do, and that's why I've been listening to it on my walks, because I do find that it is leaving me feeling better about myself and the world rather than reading a book or scrolling on TikTok and Twitter and feeling worse. And I think there have been moments actually, even when walking, which is always kind of funny
mm,
because then if I like pass a runner or something, I feel like they might be like, "What's going on with you?" But there have been some moments where I will get choked up because I
mm,
believe he's the one who's reading for the audiobook. And so I think hearing him sort of say these stories out loud, I always really love it when the authors read their own writing. I think it adds just a bit more
mhm,
emotional oomph because you can
mhm.
really hear where they want those emphasis to be, of the syllables, all that good stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and so I've gotten choked up on a couple of the
Mm.
essays. And so it's been really nice to listen to. I
No,
haven't
that's so
finished it, so
cool.
I'm excited to like look back and see sort of where my favorites are. Um, Also, for folks who are curious what it's about, basically it's a collection of essays where he rates just like a lot of random things related to the human experience. Like, I think, oh gosh, now that I'm thinking about, I'm like trying to remember some of the things he's reviewed, like balloons, or like, um, I think there was this one, oh, musicals was another, and he like rates them on a 5-star scale. And so it's really fun is what I'll do for myself is I'll give it a rating like what I would rate the thing personally,
Hmm.
thinking about like how I would relate to that concept or that object, and then I try to guess what his rating is for it, which is always really fun.
I love it. I've gotten to be in the same room with John Green. We watched The Fault in Our Stars together back in Indianapolis. Just
Wow.
me, John, and a theater full of library workers.
Amazing.
Yeah, I know. I've led a
Celebrity life
pretty
like wait,
celebrity
oh my
life.
gosh, wow.
What have you been getting into,
Uh,
Jenny?
um, I'll just go over since I've also been reading God Killer, but that actually has been going quite slowly because I just never
Mm,
have time to actually like sit and read it. So far it's a thumbs up from me. It's intense and I'm liking it. I haven't gotten far enough to really like decide if I like where the plot's truly going.
hmm.
I'm still playing Undertale Yellow. I am still really enjoying it, primarily because I'm just enjoying being back in the world and sort
Yeah.
of revisiting these uh, reimagined versions and alternate locations based on the places we're familiar with.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's really nice, and it's interesting because technically it's non-canonical, because it's a fan game, but it's nice to start thinking about like what would a prequel, to this game look like, to Undertale look like. And if you know the story of Undertale, um, before your character visits this monster world, I believe it's like 6 other humans visited, and so it got me thinking, I'm like, what would the stories of the other 5 humans be? Since now we have like
Oh,
our Undertale, we have a prequel for Yellow, what would the other sort of colors be like, as characters? And so it's just been a fun sort of fan fiction almost sort of exercise for myself. Um, Again, it's free. It's on Game Jolt if you're interested. Highly recommend. Uh,
Jenny, are you kind of a fan fiction person? Are you into that scene at all?
I used to be,
Hmm.
not so much anymore, but honestly, playing Undertale Yellow has gotten me feeling like, oh, maybe I should sort of jump back
Oh,
in.
cool.
I think if I had more time, I would be. It's just time at this point. Kind of going
I'm
back to our
right there with
conversation
you.
last week on like being a grown up, and trying to fit gaming and fandom lifestyle like into my life.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm up to cups of coffee just to make it through a day right now. So yes.
And the last shout, I can't remember if I talked about it last week or not. Marry My Husband. Did I talk? Do you recall?
No, I
Okay,
don't think
I
so.
don't
Yeah.
think I did. Um, so, first of all, if you enjoy webtoons, Marry My Husband is a webtoon. It's a Korean webtoon. It is, oh, the drama. It's like a romantic drum, not quite dramedy, more romantic drama, where this melodrama. This person,
Hmm.
um, she has been diagnosed with a stomach cancer. She's in the hospital, and she goes home to find that her husband and best friend are cheating with against her with each other. And as he like pushes her away because she says she's going to tell everyone what's going on, she like she dies. She like hits her head and she dies. But then, and this is all like within the first episode, like the first half of the first episode, right?
Oh,
Um, but then instead of dying, she wakes up 10 years in the past with the chance to redo her adult life. And so the story goes into like, what would you do if you had not one shot, but a second shot to
oh,
go. Oh, there we go, tying it in with the game there. What would you do with another shot at your life? And
hmm.
what one of the things that's really learned really early on is that whatever she changes, like any karma she sort of pushes off of her, any actions that she doesn't do, there are consequences. So, like, if she buys really good stock because she knows it's going to succeed, someone else is going to sell that stock because they are like, you can't have that energy just like multiplied, right? Something has to happen. Or if she avoids getting a burn because she knows that how it's going to happen, someone else is going to get that burn. So it plays with the like, okay, well, now what do you do when you're living your second chance at life? You know how to like, pro strat your life, but you know that like changing fate is going to have consequences. Who are you going to push things on? All of that
Oh.
stuff. It's so good. It's like if you just want like drama
Mm.
and of course a little good romance.
Hmm.
It's a K-drama. It's great. I will say Amazon is the one that converted it from webtoon to drama. So you do need Amazon Prime. And I do have one little bit of beef because I feel like Amazon really didn't do justice in terms of the quality of the outfits, the sets, the like, I feel like Amazon could have done a little bit better there. I think they could have gotten a bit more budget because there's some areas that feel just a little bit, I don't know, like cheaper to me compared to some of the higher, like more budgeted shows. But
Oh,
I'm
it's a
loving it.
TV show now.
Yeah, it's like live K-drama live. Yeah.
Oh, snap. I'm gonna watch the heck out of this.
Should. You should. It's so good. And it's currently happening. Like, as of right now, they're on episode 8.
Mm.
And I believe it's a 16 episode run. So you get 2 episodes a week. They come out on Monday and Tuesday.
Oh, I
So
could use I could use some drama. That sounds
yeah, it's very,
good.
very good. So yeah, that's really what I've been focusing on. Is
Very
catching up
cool.
to K drama, escaping life a little bit.
Feels reasonable.
Yeah. And then just to finish out the pastry case, one notable release this week. This is a DLC. You do need the base game, but Eastward is coming out with their Octopia DLC. This is really
Hmm.
cool because this is a farming, like cozy sim farming DLC that is added onto a base game that's originally like kind of a more of a Zelda action RPG style game. And from the Steam description, it seems like this takes place in an alternate timeline. So it doesn't
Hmm.
impact necessarily the events of like the base game. This is a reimagined timeline situation.
Hmm.
Um, but again, you do need the base game to play. I don't know if you need to have finished the base game to play, so that's
Eesh.
something I'll figure it out because I will definitely be getting this. But yeah, so that's going to be really cool, and I'm excited.
Very cool. Yeah, that sounds like fun. I hate that question of like, okay, if I get the DLC, can I actually play it, or do I have to be at a certain point?
Hmm.
That
Yeah, I'm hoping that because again, I think it's on the Steam page. They mention it's an alternate sort of timeline. I'm hoping that just in the start page, you can just like go to the
mm.
DLC and just play it from there. Um, but yeah, we'll see. We'll find out.
Ew.
Yeah. All right. So, as always, any questions, comments, feel free to send an email to Jenny at geeksandgrounds.com or leave a voicemail at, I should have had I didn't copy and paste the link. So, let me awkwardly get to the other page and see if I did that there. You can also leave us a voicemail at sayhi.chat/geeks and grounds if you would like, or just hop into the community in Discord and chat with folks there about what you're listening today.
Yeesh.
So we thought we had one shot,
Well, we
but it
did,
turned, well, we did, but
and then
then
there was a whole nother shot,
yes, Solstice shot.
twice shot,
Yes,
2 times shot.
one shot, two shot, three shot, four. um where to begin? Okay, so I guess one of my big questions in hopping into Solstice, which is essentially the new game plus for One Shot, um, I'm just curious. By the time you had finished the original One Shot game, did you feel like you wanted more?
I was reflecting on this because I think we talked a bit about this last time that like
Mm-hmm.
I would have been inherently unsatisfied if it would have just ended again. Like I did not send I sent Nico home. I did not have him like fix the world.
Mhm.
Um, but that I also think it would have been such a rich conversation to have been there at the time when this game first dropped, and like, oh, it's only one shot and you can't do it again.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so like I think that there was like an intrinsic value as well in like the fact that it was a true one shot. But
Mhm.
I gotta say, um, very practically, you're a person who's like really good at like replaying games, and I am not. Like with
Mhm.
very few exceptions, I do not go back to games again. And so I think when I first learned that I was going to have to replay the game in order to see the other ending, it immediately like triggered that sense of like putting me off. Like, oh
Mhm.
god, I've really got to play this whole thing again just to see what happens. And as I was reading more before I started like doing the two shot through, um, I was like, oh no, it's like fundamentally changing aspects of the second playthrough. It's not just a straight like, repeat of, assembling your acid plus your cloth plus your bottle
Mhm.
to wipe the rust off of the robot, right?
Yeah.
And I think for me it was like once I learned that, it completely removed that gut sense barrier of like I hate replaying games and don't make
Mhm.
me do this, and instead it was like I gotta know, I gotta get there. So like I don't know, I think like however they got here, the fact they are here now I think was brilliant, and the fact they made the second playthrough so fundamentally different I think
Mhm.
was, it made me like eager to jump back in.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's really interesting is that Solstice, from what I was reading just online, Solstice wasn't really planned until after the game actually ended up being sort of planned for Steam. Because originally this game was not
Mm,
on Steam. And Solstice originally was meant to be a spin off game that at least according to the fandom wiki, potentially was going to explore more of the lore of the world itself, like talking more about the author and sort of the author's journey. And so, what
mhm.
was really interesting is that this game, or this DLC, I guess, this new game plus, was originally not even supposed to be a thing, but somehow turned into it. So, I think that's kind of an interesting story as
That is
well, where I'm
interesting.
curious if we ever do get a chance to talk with the devs, like kind of how did they get into, once they started making the game, into this conclusion of it's not going to be about the author, we're still going to make this about you and Nico and essentially the world and the world machine, because you three are kind of the main characters of this, I would say.
Yeah, I love that, and I cannot wait to talk more about the world machine today. There is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that, like for without like getting into the actual like experience that we're going to be kind of walking through today. The the slow unveiling that you get through the two shot is masterfully done. Like
Hmm.
the way they slowly reveal critical parts of this world of the antagonists and protagonists and side characters or whatever, it was just so clever, and
Hmm.
I was enthralled. So yeah, I'm eager for us to start working through and talking through some of
Yeah.
that, those reveals.
Absolutely. So I think just to structure today, because I think a lot of the interesting, like the meat of the conversation is going to come after we sort of
Hmm.
outline what happened. I think we're going to go through just kind of the outline of Solstice just to remind ourselves and listeners like what did happen just at its most fundamental, and then we'll get into sort of the meat of like what it got us thinking about, because there is a lot more there, I think, to
Holy
be had.
moly.
Yeah, so much more there. So when you start Solstice, it's fascinating because you're on the title screen, you start the game again. There's a flash, and I don't know if you noticed it, but it's basically like you see the world machine for like the splittest of seconds before Nico opens their eyes and wakes up for the second time. And that for me, as someone who like I don't think I noticed it the first time I played OneShot, because I was just kind of like going through. I was like, oh, what's gonna
Mhm,
happen?
mhm.
Noticing it this time made my heart just go a little bit of flutter, because I was like, oh, this was it. Like, what a great way to start it. And for those who pay attention, know like, aha, there is something up here. So good.
Could you tell what it was? Like when the flash happened, could you see what was like going on?
Yes, but also like it's hard because since this is my second time playing it, I don't know how much of it was me like anticipating it because I kind of knew
Mm.
what to look for versus if I didn't know, would I have seen it and like understood what was going on.
Well, let me give you my baby Joel eyes. I could not tell. It happened
Yeah.
so fast that I was like, something happened there, but I couldn't tell at all what it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's man, your replay factor is so valuable.
No, but it's good to have like both perspectives, right? Um And what's incredible is that Nico remembers your name. And I think that's the thing that for me also got my heart aflutter because that was a huge element of Nico not knowing you in the first playthrough and the fact that Nico recognizes your name and calls out for you specifically. Um, that's when you know things are different this time.
I'm gonna be honest, as we get into this, I felt a little bit gaslit at times during this
Ooh.
like Barrens section.
Yeah.
So yeah, so what happens? Like so you wake up, you're back in the Barrens after you've
Yep.
kind of deleted your save file and you open your eyes. Like what's the flow? Like you're obviously not gonna do the exact same thing again. So like what is the experience?
Yeah. Well, I think initially you kind of do the exact same thing, which is why it's like, oh, maybe some of this isn't as big as I thought it was going to be. You
Mm-hmm.
have to find the remote. you,
Mm-hmm.
fortunately, you know what to do this time around because you just played the original.
Mm-hmm.
You escape grab the sun, you escape the room. Now, what I did because I was like, this is my second playthrough, so I'm gonna like do things a little differently. Is I actually
Ooh.
went north first, where previously I went south. I went north and I noticed that the robot was glitched out, which is different than the first playthrough when you can see the robot and it just is like out of power.
Yeah.
And so that for me was another moment of, oh, this world is more corrupted than it was before. Something is happening now that we're back. Uh,
And so they're signaling to you immediately that you cannot solve the same puzzles the same way.
yes. If
That's genius.
Yeah, if you happen to walk up. So,
If
because
you walk
I
up. Yeah, yeah.
imagine if you had gone south to see Profit Bot, I'm curious, what was
Yeah.
your experience then?
I went south and
Yeah.
I did not even encounter robot in this second round because I was like mainlining and speed running to get to Profit Bot and get to the caves.
Oh,
Um
interesting.
yeah. Wow. So this is like the you mentioned the glitches, and I think it's like a really important point because
Mhm.
the glitches are almost the bad guy in this whole second playthrough. Like the glitches are constantly going to be impeding your way forward.
Mhm.
You think you have a plan, you think you know what to do, and all of a sudden the glitches come.
Yep.
It's so cool that they introduced it right there, and I wish I would have seen it because that would have like foreshadowed a lot of that conflict.
Yeah. It honestly sent like a little bit of it gave me goosebumps a little
Mm,
bit, sent a little shiver down my spine simply because I hadn't that was different than the first time I played like last year, a year or two ago. And so I hadn't seen that detail before and it did give me a bit of pause. But you go to talk to Profit Bot, things kind of turn out the same until you go to silver, if I recall correctly. And that's
mhm,
when, and you start to explore the mine, which in your first playthrough, I think you find one empty battery in there or something. But it's not really consequential other than being a place to store items. The
mhm.
second time you go into the mine, though, there's a little bit more information and a little bit more of a crucial role that it plays. I guess, did you want to hop into like describing
Yeah,
what
this
happened
is
there?
like they because you are now familiar with this like mechanic of leveraging the like notes that you find outside of the game to make things happen inside of the game. You meet Silver, you're in the mine, and like you find like a little note on the ground, and if you open it and put it in the right place on your screen, the whole screen changes, and now all of a sudden there's a cart that appears. I'm gonna be honest, mechanically, this was a little clunky for me.
Yes.
Like I knew what I was supposed to do, but I didn't realize I had to like have the note in the right exact part of the screen to make it happen. And like So like that was a little bit of there's a little bit of friction for me there. Um,
Mhm.
but as soon as you get into the cart, it's like, okay, you are now very much on a different path. And so you start like going down the cart shaft. I think Silver's kind of walking along beside you, and you're learning more about the world and her experience while you're making your way down these tracks. Uh, until you kind of find your way to like what looks like almost like a server room. I don't know what you would describe it as.
Yeah, it does look like a serve room, and I can't remember if I don't think any of the glitching follows you at this point, or does it? I can't quite remember. Um,
Mm, I don't think it does
okay,
because
it doesn't
you
start
it's the
this.
next
You're right,
sequence.
because
Yeah.
yeah, once you go into this server room, I think Silver is kind of like, what's going on here? I've never seen this part of the world
Mhm.
before.
Yeah.
And I think I found that really interesting because I'm like, you are kind of the guardians of this area. You're the guardian of this area. It never occurred to you to like go further into the mines,
Yeah.
but maybe that's just part of like programming or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, as you explore the server room, you meet your first new character, the predecessor to uh, Profitbot, Prototype. Now, this character is super, super interesting because Prototype is basically the first creation by the author in an attempt to make Profit Bot, and Prototype never got to like receive the Messiah essentially.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so this is like the first time that they're actually talking to Nico, the first time they're doing kind of what their role even entailed. Um, and they said you want a puzzle quest because what was it? There was like some bit of information that you needed to unlock to like
Their
get
memory is
their
behind the
memory. Yes,
puzzle.
that's
And so you like kind of get their hard drive or something like that
what.
so that they can actually remember their prophecies.
Yes, I have to admit, I could have used the fast travel maybe a bit more efficiently, but having to go from like the mines back to the dorms try and I didn't have my notebook with me, so I didn't have any way to like write down which dorm was like what icon, because you're supposed to be like, okay, well here's the dorm that's, or here's the building that's the dorm, here's the hospital, here's this other thing, the I had to go back and forth a couple times because I had nothing to like record my responses, and I kept getting it wrong and misremembering the locations, and so that part for me was just like, why didn't I
I
not have
just used the
paper?
walkthrough guide. I'm gonna be honest. I didn't even try to solve that
Smart.
puzzle
So
because I was like,
smart.
I was on a plane. I was like, I gotta get through this thing, and yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So I will say for me, the friction came with the puzzle, this puzzle in particular, because it was just like, oh my gosh, because you have to go on the mine cart, go all the way back. I honestly should have just used the technology at my disposal and just looked at the guide. That would have saved me a little bit of grief. But yeah, you unlock Profit Bot's memory. And speaking of memory, I'm trying to remember and look at my screenshots and see what we learn there specifically. Um, do, 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 do. And if you also remember, I'm scrolling through all of my Rue conversation right now. And that's quite
Hmm.
huge. I think the biggest thing from ProfitBot I remember. Oh, yes. Okay. So here's where ProfitBot gets interesting because ProfitBot is the one that immediately alerts Nico to the thing that we had the conversation in the elevator. And
Mhm.
Nico learns that everything is fictional, everything is generated and fake. And this
Mhm.
part is where I got emotionally invested again because Nico basically asks, like, aren't you supposed to be a kind god, Kimchica? Because every time we open up this program, Nico is trapped, unable to leave.
And they
Um,
explicitly say that you brought Nico here.
yes. And I was just like, why are you putting this on me? First of
This is
all,
where I felt gaslit. I was like, "What the fuck? Don't you tell Nico." Like, I didn't know when I
I
turned this
know.
game on I was bringing Nico here. Are you kidding me?
I know. I was like, if I knew, I wouldn't have done it.
Mhm.
But I guess, well, saying that now, I'm like, I played the game again. So did I just do what the game? That's a whole different conversation. Um,
But, like, do you remember we talked about this, I think it was in the very first week,
uh huh.
where we recognized that we were playing a game, And we were like, it's kind of weird that the game isn't recognizing that it's a game. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, this antagonist obviously knows that it's in a game system. It knows who
Hmm.
you are. It knows you are a video game player, and yet it's referring to you as a god. And like, what is going on there? And that is like explicitly addressed in this moment too, because
Hmm.
ProfitBot explains, not in this like metaphorical Joel's a god thing, but in this like, no, 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 you are in a simulation right now, and
Yes.
Joel is a player in of that simulation and is like moving things around to try and work through it. And I was like, thank you, Prophet Bot. I appreciate the detailed explanation to Nico here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think what is for me what was really interesting was yeah, the clarification that sorry, not prototype gave was the flaw of the game is that it cannot be run independently. It needs
Mm-hmm,
us and it
mm-hmm,
needs Nico.
mm-hmm.
Um, Nico being trapped there is a function of needing something real in the game to run it, and Nico needs us to help manipulate. So, what I thought was also interesting is it doesn't need just us. It also requires Nico to be the person or the cat human there in their
And
place.
in addition to that,
Hmm.
during one of the moments where the computer starts talking to you, it apologizes to Nico for Nico being here and is like frustrated that you, Joel, have made Nico sad.
Right. Well, going back to what is it, Asimov's rules of
Exactly.
robots and robothood and
Hmm.
all of that, because as Nico is the only quote unquote real thing in this simulation, the code of the entity or the world machine is designed to protect Nico at this point. And the world machine doesn't want Nico there. The world machine knows that there are these corruptions that could hurt Nico. And so, yeah, you or us as the player are kind of at fault for coming back in and bringing Nico.
And it was like, yes, exactly. And then it was like, because it's apologizing to Nico for him being here, I was like, wait, these aren't the words of a bad guy. Like, what is happening here? And so we're back to
Right?
this like the difference between an antagonist and a villain. And I think
Mhm.
in the first one shot run through, this computer system that you're talking to feels very much like a villain. And this is like it breaking, and you're like, oh no, it's more of an antagonist than a villain. Like there's friction being
Mhm.
caused here because of this thing, but it doesn't have malicious intent. It's trying to do the right thing. What's
Right.
going on here?
Yeah, which it becomes infinitely more interesting in my opinion. And I think to answer maybe one of the earlier question that I asked, like, did you feel like you needed Solstice? Did you feel like you
Mhm,
needed it?
mhm,
As a player, when I finished the original one shot, I honestly, even though I was super emotionally impacted and
mhm,
devastated because I was like,
mhm.
"Oh, my choices, I only had one shot." I was actually quite happy with if that was the ending. This is the point in which I realized I actually am finding this way more interesting, and I hope that this continues because if this works out the way I think it may, I much would rather have a solstice ending
Mhm.
personally.
Yeah.
This is where I started feeling like, okay, this is going to be worth investing that time and energy in, which is also interesting considering the concept of taming, like what you consider
Mhm.
worthwhile spending your time and energy and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I think to our listening audience, like hang on to Jenny's comments about how the system sees Nico and kind of Nico alone
Hmm.
as a real person, because I think that's going to come up kind of
Hmm.
consistently as we get to like kind of the climax and following action of the game.
Oh, yes. So we have this conversation with Prototype. So much knowledge is just being dropped, and you're trying to process it. And you realize, okay, you, Prophet Bot and Silver, need to escape the Barrens. You need to move on to the Glen. You start your journey, and unfortunately, the glitches, the squares have caught up to you. Um, and they are chasing you through the mine shaft. And the only way that Nico is able to safely escape is Silver and prototype essentially holding those glitches at bay, and
Hmm.
holding the mine shaft sort of open, I guess, or from caving in, so that Nico can leave through this backdoor shortcut to the
Yeah.
Glen.
And Prophet Bot has you take his hard drive out so that you
Yes.
can add him to another robot body later. So,
Yes. Very good
he,
prep from Profit Bot there.
it's almost like he knew.
I
Almost like
know.
he knew.
Whoa.
So we make our way through the mines this time. And so instead of crossing the water to get to the glen, we're going through the mines.
Mm-hmm.
You come out in the glen through it in a different area,
Yep.
and it is very different than your first time through. I like this was probably the most even in the one shot, it was still like probably had the most like organic material. Like there were vines and trees, even if they were dead,
Mm-hmm.
goats, etc. But when you get to there this time, it's like the vines are kind of overrun this area. A lot of the bridges have collapsed, and in fact, you have to leverage and somehow get these vines to change in order to navigate the world at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very different than the first time.
Yes. And what's really interesting is, the island, the vines are there, and you discover, I think in your conversation with Maze, because you can go
Hmm.
back and see
Yeah.
Maze, um, this is due to an effort to hold everything together, because everything is starting to come apart, these islands. And so this is Maze doing her best to make sure that, everyone sort of above ground on the island is able to still be safe, walk around, and keep a semblance of whatever normality that they can.
Hmm. And I think she had a really interesting line about how you offer her the sun in your
Hmm.
dialogue with her, and she has an interesting line around how like the sun brings her comfort, but in this moment she doesn't need comfort. She needs to like endure the pain in order to like hold this world together or something along
Hmm.
those lines. I didn't get
Yeah.
that exactly right, but that's the gist. And it was
Yes.
just like the self-sacrifice element of the game really came through in this moment, and again that becomes a consistent theme throughout two shot.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think other than that, you meet, I wrote down their names, Alula and Calamus again.
Hmm.
And essentially I think just your time in the glens is really short. Essentially you see them, you gather them in a boat, you do another one of the Clover journal puzzles to make the
Hmm.
boat populate, and you are trying to get to the refuge. And so you take this boat that's ostensibly going to take you to a different part of the glen, and maybe hopefully get you closer to where you need to be. And in this, I think what's really interesting is you go to Alula and Calamis's mom's grave,
Hmm.
which again kind of, I think it's interesting that in this part of the game, you are visiting areas that were like outside of the bounds of the original. And this was where it felt the most clear. Like this happens in the mine shaft, but I think this idea of the programming for Alula and Calamus originally probably didn't include the grave. Like maybe it included the
Hmm.
concept of our mother's grave is in the glen, but did they ever get the chance to actually go? I don't know. And so
Interesting.
as I was playing this, I was thinking like, is this maybe one of the first times they've actually gone, because now the programming is like everything's shifting and everything's moved. So that was just interesting for me. And you meet a very, very impactful character named
The one of the
Cedric.
coolest dudes in the game.
Yeah, Cedric is so cool. And he has this amazing like plane, because
Hmm.
apparently planes are definitely a thing here. And but the plane is grounded, not able to fly.
Yeah.
So you do a fun little side quest. Have to get some gears, have to get a working battery. I will highlight getting the battery, and the idea of self-sacrifice again becomes a just another recurring thematic moment, because when you go into the glen and their only battery that's available is in the structure that's powering all of the
Hmm.
robots,
Hmm.
the robots say, take the
Take it.
battery.
Hmm.
So, um, yeah, it's just another thing that comes up again.
So it's really interesting, this like robot sacrifice element, because the we have learned that the game only sees Nico as a person, which means
Mm-hmm.
it sees everyone else as a program,
Mm-hmm.
which means these little robots that we're meeting throughout the world are programming. So when they're sacrificing themselves, it is them as programs sacrificing themselves to themselves, a program. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yes.
Which is, I'll like bring this back to like some religious elements here, which is
Mm-hmm.
like the whole like Jesus sacrifice thing. Like one of the interesting criticisms like of that storytelling is like it's God sacrificing himself to himself. And so
Mm.
it's just like another kind of interesting possible parallel here.
Yeah.
um and it's like the more I think about it, the more it kind of like cooks my noodle, if you will. Like I'm just like, wait, what does that mean? What are the implications of this? That like we're running into programs that are sacrificing themselves so that we and Nico can continue willingly. Like, is that baked into their programming? Like, do they have the will to not sacrifice themselves? Is this a choice that they're making?
Well, it's interesting because I kind of just assumed that they didn't, because also these are robots that haven't been tamed for, like, again, going back to this idea of like there are some robots that have been tamed who have this
Hmm.
ability to make decisions, to learn, to do something different than their original intent. And then you have these
Hmm.
robots where specifically these research robots were only meant, as far as I understood, to do this research on the
Right.
phosphor. So I just kind of played assuming and just being like, I guess that their programming is to do research and also to not harm anything like real, essentially, because I would imagine it's embedded in the code of every robot in this world. And
Hmm.
thus, Nico, as a real person asking for this sacrifice of them, they wouldn't have any choice in my head. That's what I was thinking.
No, I agree. I think it's just like it makes sense that they don't have a choice, and it's like they are programmed to die as a sacrifice for themselves, like for
Mm-hmm.
the eventual health of the whole system and everyone in it. It's
Mm-hmm.
just it's
Yeah.
an interesting concept when you take that the free will element away. Like, what does a sacrifice mean?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. It was just like really fascinating. You start seeing like, oh, this is going to be a trend that I, as the player, am going to have to keep watching characters die and sacrifice themselves through the second
Yes.
shot.
Oh my gosh. Well, and what's interesting is this, uh, it's not a sacrifice, but it becomes a trend also of characters getting put into harm's way as a result of
Hmm.
trying to get Nico to their end goal.
Hmm.
As we fly, we've gathered the supplies, we fly over to the refuge. We see that happen with Cedric, I believe,
Hmm.
where Cedric drops Nico off, but then as Cedric goes back to get Alula and Calamus, the glitches take Cedric.
Hmm.
And so, in association with Nico, it's like one step behind anything that Nico approaches, touches, interacts with, they are then taken. The same happens with the lamplighter, who originally we met, who was stuck at the elevator and trying to get down to the surface level of the refuge. We ride an alternate elevator with the lamplighter,
Hmm.
but then he also
Get stuck,
gets
tells you
stuck.
to go on.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
to quote Death of a Salesman, life is a casting off, and it was brutal, all the moments that you had
Yeah.
to cast off in this game.
Yeah. I did not have as literary of a reference. I kept thinking of the meme, the Harry Potter meme, where it's like, he's going to sacrifice himself. Run,
No.
no. Once I make my move,
Oh, that's
you're
so
free to
perfect.
check the king. I'm sorry. I have to. That is probably the
No, you
single
did have
most
to.
funny. I don't know why. What about it? That scene is just always hilarious to me.
Yep, it is,
No,
and
Ron,
it's gotten
no.
even funnier over time.
It
Oh,
has.
speaking of funny, did you catch the clock joke right before the elevator?
I If I did, I don't remember it. Wait, what's the clock joke?
There's a clock that's running, like, by the
Mhm.
elevators, and they're stuck at 11 o'clock, like, the 11th hour, and I was like, "Eh, I see what you're doing there,
Hey, that's a
game.
good
It's the 11th
detail. Oh my
hour."
gosh. Um,
Good.
eternally at the 11th hour in this game.
Mhm.
Um, so we're at the refuge. We are at the 11th hour. Everyone's hiding in the library, in the cafe. We talk to, what was it? Basically the doctor that invented silver.
Yeah.
And she even says like, "Hey, it's better for this world to die naturally. Maybe it's just like just let it go." Um, but we meet a pivotal character when we get to the refuge. And this was the character that I referenced where I was like, "Did you see the
Yep.
flash?" Um, we meet Rue, this lovely little fox who's so adorable.
And you correct me if I'm wrong because I think you mentioned this, that you met Rue in the first playthrough,
Yes. Yeah,
and
that's what I
I
was talking about
didn't.
with the flash, where it's like
Yeah.
when you originally, when you play one shot, you're walking down the alleyway. If you choose to go up one of the
Mhm.
alleys, you see Rue's silhouette as a flash, and then you see Rue running behind a tree, but you never get any other interaction with them in that playthrough.
And, like, it was one of those things where I was, like, so bummed. I freaking love foxes, and so when I found out that I missed it, I was, like, really bummed, and so so what you're saying is that flash at the beginning game, that is a flash of Rue?
No, not the beginning of the game. As you're walking down the alley, you actually get a flash of Rue's silhouette in the as you play one shot for the first time.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. This game, the layers, the levels,
It's so
incredible.
good. And so you team up with Rue, and eventually Rue asks you to go basically to this vantage point in the city, and this is where I think one of my favorite conversations
Mhm,
happens. Um,
mhm.
it's between Nico, Rue looking out over the city. The sun is just at Nico's feet between them, and they talk about basically the nature of the world machine. They talk about
Exactly.
taming, and this conversation goes places. I guess would you like to kick it off, sort of on some of the things that you drew from it?
Yeah, like, so they very clearly articulate that the world machine itself
Hmm.
is the entity that you have been talking to. This, like,
Yes.
seemingly, like, antagonistic entity is the world machine.
Hmm.
They explain that, the machine is running a simulation. That the simulation was built because the world that the author lived in was kind of falling apart, and so they build this simulation, and the world machine is kind of like a caretaker of it, making sure it's all running correctly, except for three entities that are like real people inside: Rue, Cedric, and
Profit
who's the
or
and
prototype.
prototype Prophet Bot.
Yeah.
And that they're like real people, but that the world machine, this entity, does not recognize them as real people. And
Hmm.
so, as it has kind of been degrading, it explains that the world machine is actually trying to like protect and keep the simulation running as best as it can, but that it's kind of being forced, like from its own logic, to like insert these glitches or whatever as a
Hmm.
way to like protect itself and protect the simulation. And Nico's presence as an objectively real person that it can't write off, like Nico's very presence in this world is what is causing the system to like glitch even worse.
Hmm.
And I might have gotten some of those details wrong, but like those are kind of the broad strokes.
Yeah, that's pretty much, I would say that's like a really good summary of it. Yeah, I think this idea of the code having been corrupted, the world machine essentially finding that corruption, conflicting, and then thus creating this spiral of like sort of continuous conflict and then corruption, conflict, and corruption until it's kind of just lost itself a little bit. And I think what was the line? Rue says, "My creator says it's largely an involuntary process induced by stress and the desire to self terminate," which I found really intense.
Oh, I think I
Um,
missed that.
yeah. And I almost don't know even what to make of it because there's this like the idea of self termination of a program, like a program that
Mhm.
is self I don't even know if self-aware is the right word, but the program attempting to terminate itself is just a really that was a concept that I kind of sat with and I didn't know exactly what to make of it, but it was an intense phrasing and I thought it was interesting that that was used. Um
Yeah. Oof. Well, and especially because like it has been through its like self-sacrifice, it has been self-terminating, and the glitches are
mhm.
self-terminating. That's fascinating. I can't believe I missed that. Wow.
Yeah. But then the conversation turns towards taming. And this is where
Mhm.
we start, I think, to get a much more clear idea. And this is where the game does a really good job of illustrating exactly what taming is to this game and to this world. Whereas in the first one shot, in the original one shot playthrough, you're kind of left to your own devices as to what it
Yeah.
really means. And here we get clarity on that. Rue talks about how robots can be mass produced. They are taught to do singular jobs. They are not meant to think freely because they're bound by their code. And um, we learn that the process of taming is the process of developing a special bond, of spending time and energy, and it allows this sort of unreal thing to then become real and valid as their own being as an individual because of your belief in them. And this is really, really important to remember before we move into like that last section. It's this idea of believing in something even if it doesn't believe in itself, essentially.
Mhm.
And I just thought this was a lovely conversation. I enjoy this. I think this is one of my favorite parts of the game.
Yes. Okay. So, from what I took away, there were
Mm-hmm.
kind of two factors for taming. One is the entity, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
has to believe that it has like free will, and the second is that it has to have a bond, and that the bond is what like reinforces that free will is truly there.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of my takeaway, and I felt like it was like right back to the Velveteen Rabbit. Was that kind of also where you were mentally as you were like reading through this?
Yes, yes, because I think, and that is exactly what I thought when I was reading this,
Hmm.
and playing this through the first time with the first one shot, or like the what is it, just OG one shot
Hmm.
proper. When I was playing it, I instantly thought of the Velveteen Rabbit because one of the components of the Velveteen Rabbit isn't just that the boy believes the rabbit is real and the rabbit's content with that. It is the rabbit then believes he himself is a real rabbit through this love, um, which I think is such a beautiful concept. It's wonderful. Uh, it's just kind of this like, it's this sort of self actualization that I think of when I think of just like relationships and love in general, like the ability to love someone despite maybe what they might not see in themselves and allow them to see that in themselves, I think is super powerful. And so that's what I started thinking about, where how like this is a version of love that I really enjoy seeing explored in the game.
I love that that's where your brain went because that is a much
Did
nicer
yours
place
not?
than where my brain went. So I
Really?
threw a link into our notes that we can share out, but
Mhm.
once I got this more concrete definition of taming and what it is, my mind went back to like my philosophy minor, and I was really thinking
Mhm.
about Hegel's Lord Bondsman dialectic, and uh,
Ooh, okay.
I will
Yeah.
just read this to you, and then we can kind of talk through it. So this comes from Phenomenology of Spirit, which is like it's like 1700s. This is an old ass theory or
Yeah.
belief or philosophy. Okay. The passage describes in narrative form the development of self consciousness, as such, in an encounter between what are essentially two distinct self conscious beings. So you have to have two beings for there to be self consciousness. The essence of the
Mhm.
dialectic is the movement or motion of recognizing, in which these two self conscious beings uh, have to recognize each other as being conscious in order for themselves to feel like they have consciousness. So, in other words, like I have to see
Mhm,
you,
mhm.
Jenny, as being a self conscious being in order for you to validate that I am indeed a conscious being. But what he
Mm.
argues is that over time, there's this struggle to death, struggle to the death, in which the bondsman or the master uh, will enforce itself and its power, exert its power over the bondsman or like the slave in some translations. But in so doing, by
Mm,
exerting that power, I'm putting myself in a position of supremacy. And therefore, I can no longer get validation of myself and of my consciousness from you, this other being, because I don't see you as being
mhm,
an equivalent conscious entity. And so it is ultimately this like
mm,
self-defeating cycle where if I don't recognize you as conscious, I lose my own consciousness. And it's like as I was playing through, my brain like immediately shot to this point. And especially when I thought about the implications with Rue and Prophetbot and Cedric, where it's like, no, these are conscious beings, but because the world engine, world drive, world the world
world
machine
machine, the world
stopped
machine.
seeing them as like equal conscious beings,
Mhm.
it started going down this self-destructive cycle of self-termination. So like I know this is like so
I
nerdy, but like
love that. No, that's exactly what we're here for. I think that's really incredible. And honestly, this is actually making me now think of a game that I very recently finished called In Stars and Time. Honestly, I keep talking about it. I swear I am going to figure out how to make it a G&G game someday. It's a little bit long, but it is so dang good. And this conversation really, and Hegel really ties into that because there's a part of this In Stars and
mhm.
Time game where I guess very, very light spoilers. I'm going to keep it as vague as possible while coherent. Your character starts to see things as unreal, even though they're in a world that they previously kind of associated with reality. And as a result of not seeing these things as real, their behavior and the way they start to shift and essentially not just terminate sort of their relationships with these other characters, but they start harming themselves essentially in a lot. It becomes this sort of, again, that spiral that we see the world machine go into, as well as this character. So I think that's absolutely like that read of it is really fascinating to me, and I'm so happy you brought it up. It's really funny because I'm like, "Oh, why should I not see it as like this beautiful moment? Because I think it's like both
Oh,
ends can be
100%.
true, which I think is what's really cool because it's like what is it, the ceiling and the floor, there's this like we did this when we were at our old job, the office job, where we had like the personality test that we would take for like how to optimize your work
Oh
personality. And
yeah.
it's like I forget what this was
Strengths
called, but
finder?
it's like you, not strengths finder, but it was
Four
another
quadrant
one where
one or
it's
something?
like
I don't know.
you it's like where you are when you are your
Mhm.
best self, this is how these
Mhm.
traits manifest. When you are at your worst, this is how they kind of are this corrupted version of you. um, is how I always thought. I think it's just like here's the ways you're not productive and capitalism. But in my head, I think I see these two perspectives, like you taking it through this really like sort of darker philosophical turn, and then me being like, but love reflected back to each other, and how it can really be the floor and the ceiling of what happens when you start to like perceive others and the ways that you treat
Mm.
them and the ways you treat yourself. It's like
I think
really
it's gotta be
cool. So yeah,
both for
thank you for bringing
sure.
that.
Because like as Rue
Yeah.
is describing it in this scene, I definitely I wrote this down. I wrote Velveteen Rabbit like in that moment because I was like
Hmm.
definitely on the same page. But like the subsequent scene when you're like actually engaging with the world engine
Yeah.
and it's saying like it literally says before I was self-aware and then like two sentences later it says I'm not tame. And it's like, well, wait,
Hmm.
how can you be self-aware and not tame? And it's not until Nico says essentially, no, like you are tame, you do have free will, that it recognizes that it is conscious. And so it's like for me it was like
Yep.
the Rue conversation was very much like the Velveteen story. And then I wasn't really struck by the
Mm,
Hegelian story until you have the conversation with the world engine like subsequent to this where you're like,
yeah.
oh, in the moment that Nico says, no, you are an independently thinking being, that it recognizes
Mhm,
itself as
mhm.
being conscious. So like, yeah, I
Yeah.
think we're very much aligned, and I think like it's so cool that like it
Yeah,
kind of
that's
starts
great.
you up here, and then it's like you see it play out in that kind of the pit of despair.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and again, I think it's that human experience, right? Because like some is self-confidence, for example. Like on some days, I feel so on top of the world and I'm like, man, look at me kicking butt. I'm doing this stuff. I'm feeling great. I'm getting all these things done that I'm hoping to get done. And I'm like doing the things that I want to do. And then some days, when you're just feeling like, what the heck, like what is existence at this point? And I do feel like it kind of goes, you go through that with the world machine and also with
Mm.
Nico in terms of how you start to perceive them and you see them perceiving themselves a little bit. Yeah. So let's dive into the world machine because at this point, you talk with Rue, you have this beautiful moment on the rooftops of the refuge, and you go into this door that has been counting down, which is
Hmm.
so ominous. Um, and that door was in the original game before the Solstice update came out. I think it originally, when they had announced the Solstice on Steam, they like had it counting down to the Solstice. Again, I think
Whoa,
is
cool.
what I remember from the wiki. Um, but when you get into the world machine, and you have this conversation, what's interesting is the form that the world machine takes when conversing with Nico, because Nico is looking at this screen, and instead of an empty blank screen, which is kind of what I assumed originally, I was like, the entity has always been just like text in a blank screen. You actually see like a representation of Nico. And I went back and forth because I was like, is this Nico reflected in the screen? Or is this Nico in the screen? Like, is this the entity in the screen taking Nico's form? And I went back and forth on this. And I was like, am I overthinking this?
I
Maybe.
love
I
the
don't know.
reflection angle. I had not even thought of that. I definitely went straight to it's taking Nico's form, which also kind of
Hmm.
reinforced the like master slave dialectic thing for me. But I love the
Hmm.
idea that it's Nico seeing themselves like in the reflection of like a computer monitor. That's a really interesting take. I like that a
Hmm.
lot.
Yeah. I was like, I wasn't sure what to make of that exactly. Um, so I guess because you've kicked us off already on the dialogue that happens with the world machine. Did you want to dig into, or could you dig into it a little bit more in terms of like what do they talk about and sort of what are the emotional arcs that happen
Yeah,
there?
I the details I didn't capture because I was like so like enthralled in that moment. But I think like this idea of
Yeah.
watching it like explain itself and explain why it was taking these actions and how like it really was informed by this desire to protect, and it saw
Hmm.
itself as doing what the master, sorry, what the author had asked it to do. Like it's just following its programming, but that programming itself
Mm,
was self-destructive, and it recognized that. And I thought
yeah.
that was such a like, it really made me feel bad for the world machine, which I did not think was going to be possible
Yeah.
after the one shot. So yeah, I don't know if there were some specific things that you thought like, oh wait, like some like curious dialogue sticking points that you experienced.
Um, I looked back and I honestly did not screenshot any of this, which means I probably also was just like so
Mhm,
in it that I
mhm.
just didn't even remember to like take
Yep.
notes at this point. I think what was really interesting to me was that in this conversation, Nico basically says that they trust the world machine and that they trust even though the code is broken that they can go outside again, something real, putting their trust and energy and belief and love into
Mhm,
the thing that needs to be, or that they
mhm.
are taming. um I think also what was interesting is that Nico brings us into it and says something along the lines of like, your name, like Kimchica believes in you as well. Why else would Kimchica play this game again? Or why else would Kimchica enter the simulation again? Why would they keep coming back? Because, this person also believes. And I thought that was really cool, especially because In this section of the game in Solstice, you are much more of a outsider looking in than with the
Mhm.
first game. I think what's interesting as we're now kind of at the end of Solstice and we're going to start broadening our conversation a little bit is with Solstice, pretty much the entire time you don't really talk to Nico the entire time. You are just observing things as they happen. Whereas in the first portion, in OneShot, you are talking to Nico. You are much more of a guide to Nico. So it feels like almost this sense of, even though you're controlling Nico still, so you kind of have that technical agency, it's almost like your agency is given up a little
Mhm.
bit for
Mhm.
Nico to take that role on, which I think is also really powerful considering the role that Nico had when you played One Shot proper.
That's a really good point. I had not really thought about that. Like the transference of agency or power in that world. Oh man, that like
Mm.
puts me in this like weird cycle of like how I was like feeding into the like Lord Bondsman situation where it's like, well, I recognize that I'm
Yeah.
a real person, but I don't recognize that these things are real people. This is just a game. And now it's like, but I was like very emotionally invested in it. It felt very real to me. And now that you've like framed it like that, it's like, oh god damn it. Like you're totally right. And I fell into the trap. I fell in.
Yeah, I don't know. I just I felt like this ending sort of gave me what
Mhm,
I needed, and I know some of the critiques, what's really cool is that in the Discord, folks kind of have run the range in sort of saying how they have either appreciated or have critiqued
mhm,
this,
mhm.
addition to One Shot, from folks saying like, "Ah, I wish that sort of integrity of the One Shot was kept. I feel like that would have made it feel more impactful at the end." To folks who are saying no, this sense of closure that this ending gives provides this really nice bow, for me to end my experience with. I'm a bit more in the camp of I really appreciated the like sort of happier ending, the catharsis that I think for me this ending provided. But I'm curious how you felt by the time we got to the
Yeah.
end.
So I okay, so I'm gonna start by saying like this is 100 obviously this is 100% just Joel's opinion. I don't think there's any like right or wrong thing
Hmm.
about this. But like what I thought of was I really is kind of like what we started with in our conversation. Like I would have liked to have been there when it was a true one shot, just to have been part of that experience. Um,
Hmm.
but let me like make that a little bit more substantial by saying I think if this was a true one shot and always stayed a one shot, it would have almost been a gimmick. And I think gimmicks don't have staying power as stories. Like it's an interesting
Mm.
Wikipedia entry someday. I think by allowing you to go back and play the solstice, it takes it from it's a cool game that was a bit thought provoking and had an interesting gimmick to a game that really allows you, if you're being like a critical, experiential person, um, to have an experience that is so unique in gaming and allows you to kind of plumb such interesting depths. Um, to me, that's really special and something that will make me remember this
Mm.
game for a very, very long time, and maybe gives it a bit more cultural staying power that I don't think a game that kind of had a gimmick, and I'm using that like very loosely. I don't mean that pejoratively.
Right.
Um, would have. So I think from a staying power
Yeah.
perspective culturally, I think it's really important that it had the solstice. What do you think?
Hmm. Yeah. I'm with you there. I think I hadn't really thought about this idea of the solstice providing that staying power. Um, but after hearing you phrase it and talk through it like that, I think you're 100% right. I think again, it becomes, I think it's just interesting because of the way that I particularly enjoy playing. I really like to replay games that have this emotional resonance. And what's interesting is you always have this feeling of like, oh, you never get your first
Mm,
time playing a game again. Um, And granted, after you do Solstice, you kind of have completed the arc, and so you don't get the first time you play Solstice again. But I think what was really impactful and fascinating for me was this was the first time I replayed a game, and upon my first replay felt like I was playing it for the first time again. And I think that was something truly special, simply because, talking about and easing into our reflection question for the week, that post-game sadness, post-game depression, however you want to call the sad feeling that you get when you finish something. um I think Solstice allowed me to, well, really feel excited by replaying something and realizing I don't have that feeling anymore, because now this is the first time again. But it also doubled the
Mm,
sadness at the end, when we did finally come to the quote, true ending of the game, and Nico is back in their room. The sun is shining for the
mhm,
first time. So you see that the sun has been restored. The world machine was able to, remember the original code. Um, and that like door opens and you see Nico being like, I see the fields, I see my mom. Like, oh, that just absolutely wrecked me. And here was when the tears
mm,
just really just like, they were going for me. And I think it wasn't because, compared to when I played OneShot, I had tears because I felt so conflicted about the decision I had to make. And it was really nice to finish this game out not feeling that conflict, and just feeling so happy for this character that I invested all this time into. And so for me, that
ugh,
catharsis and that like very, that happy ending, I thought was really well worth it. And it felt very rewarding as a player. Like I felt like we and Nico had earned it. And it was so nice to just be like, I finally get you to go home to eat pancakes and see your mom
I want
again.
pancakes right now.
I
I
know.
I love that, Jenny, and I'm so glad that you were able to um, experience that emotion, even if it was like a sad emotion, or even if it was a cathartic emotion. I suppose I was saying to you before we hopped on today that for me, I think I was in two. You know how they say like you can feel your emotions, you can ignore your emotions, or you can intellectualize your
Mm-hmm.
emotions. I think I was
Mm-hmm.
on the intellectual side of that, where I was just like so locked into like the implications of the game that I didn't feel it when I finished it. Um,
Mm,
however, like when I finished the one shot experience, it was the exact opposite. I was way in my feelings.
interesting.
I mean, I had doomed Nico to return to his home with the knowledge that he had quote like let a world die. I had let an entire world die, and I felt it. I felt that emotion when I finished the one shot, but when I finished the two shot, I was just like so into the implications of the dialogue and like yeah, like you see like kind of the like here's what the world looks like after like those little like flashes and it's like oh that's
Mm-hmm.
fun, that's like kind of cool, but like I wasn't feeling it. And so yeah,
Mm.
I almost regret it. Like I regret that I wasn't able to feel the experience, because I, you know, obviously that's what has the staying power ultimately for anything.
Yeah, really interesting. So I guess just to clarify, do you regret playing
No, no, no. I
Solstice?
regret over
Okay, just
intellectualizing the ending and not feeling
got
as
it.
much as I
Okay.
could have. Um,
Oh, interesting. Now, I'm curious, and maybe this is just like a nope, this is just where my head was at. Maybe it's that simple, but I'm curious if there was anything that could have been done to allow you to get into the feelings element of it versus like intellectualizing everything. And if you're like, I don't
no, I
know,
do know because the answer
that's
is if I
okay.
weren't doing a
Yeah.
podcast where I had to really think about a game and like what I was going to say about it and take notes about it, then I probably would have been feeling it a little bit more. But I was like,
Interest.
no, I
Sorry.
think it's fine. Like that's the whole point of this particular podcast is that we
Uh,
get to have these kind of critical conversations and you know, maybe because we're having the conversation, other people can experience the emotion of the second of the two shot more so. Like
Mhm.
I really hope you, listener, if you are playing the game or about to play the game, that you allow yourself to feel the two-shot ending more so than just like really break it down, because
Mhm,
I
mhm,
think the staying power of it will be just that much more impactful.
mhm. You just need to come over and hang out with me as we play, because I just drop of a hat, I'll just cry. I am all feelings when I'm playing these games.
I think that's
Yeah,
reasonable. I
sometimes
think
maybe too
that's
much
reasonable.
so. Sometimes sometimes I should tone it down maybe, but um yeah, I think I'm really happy that we got to play this as a community. I think the experience of enjoying a
Mm,
game with other people has also allowed me to feel a little bit less sort of sad when we do finish games, because I know that I'm like, I know we've got the podcast, so I know
mhm.
I can talk to Joel about it. I know in Discord, everyone's going to be chatting about how they experienced it and some of the things they took away with it. So it feels like it ebbs that that melancholy that I get when finishing a game like this. Whereas before, when I finish a game like this, I'm like, what do I do with all of these
Yeah.
emotions right
Oh,
now?
that's real.
What happens next? Um, yeah, I'm curious though, just to get into this question
Mhm.
explicitly. This is the one that folks have been reflecting on this week. Do you typically get post game sadnesses? And if you do, like how do you deal with it? Maybe what are some examples of games that have really
Mhm.
given you that
I'm
feeling?
actually going to tie this back to one of our previous conversations about how we've changed as we play games as we've gotten older. Because
Ooh,
I think
yeah.
one of the things I talked about with that question was the feeling of urgency to like blaze through games because I don't have very much time to game anymore. I actually think that's also
Hmm.
kind of emotionally protective. Like, because I'm so focused on wrapping up and finishing a game so I can get on to the next one. Like, I got to finish Baldur's Gate so that I can play Final Fantasy. It's like, I think in some ways that mindset uh, prevents me from feeling some of those post game sads as much as I could.
Mm.
That said, there certainly have been games that like when I've gotten to the end, it's like I'm gonna miss these characters. I'm gonna miss this cast and crew. And honestly, like I think to uh, what was the A Space for the Unbound was one of those experiences where like you finish the game and like we talked about this when we played it, but um that final act of the game was just like one emotional hit after another, and the feeling that I had afterwards was like I would have so much more empathy and understanding if I were to play through this again. And I would love to, like, now that I know like what the big twists and turns were of that game, which I won't like spoil in case y'all
Mm.
want to go back, but you should because it's a great game.
Mhm.
Now that I know what was like really going on, like beneath the covers, if you will, I would be able to connect with that game on a totally different level. And I think that for me, it's a lot more of those experiences where it's like, yeah, I get sad, but more because it's like almost like a missed opportunity that I wasn't able to engage as fully because I didn't know something until the very end of the game. And now that I know that thing,
Mm.
oh man, like I love to go back and like hang out with those characters again and like see things with that other perspective. Like To the Moon is another great example of that. Like as you understand now what was
Mhm.
really going on there, it's like, oh man, like I could go back and like see these memories and these characters that like experience in lives and like really connect on a different level. But because, as we discussed earlier, I don't really replay games very often, I'm kind of denying myself that that experience. So how about you? Like, how do you deal with it? Like, what happened? Like, we know that you are a feeling person, Jenny, and that is a great thing.
Yes.
You've talked many times about like the emotional experiences you have while you play. Um, maybe
Mhm.
this is part of it. Like, do you think that one of the reasons that you are so quick to replay some specific games is to kind of fight off some of the post game sads?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I will rarely immediately
Hmm.
replay a game. I think even though oftentimes when I finish a game that's had a really impactful, especially emotional arc, because generally I don't get the post game sads when I'm playing like, I don't know, the Sims
Splatoon.
or Splatoon or Suika
Hmm.
game or any number of titles that are much more like I think systems or mechanics based. It really only happens for me in those narrative games where you finish up a story and you sort of like close the virtual book, so to speak. Um, I almost I almost appreciate being able to sit with some of that emotion sometimes because it means that talking about like self-sacrifice and like inflicted like sort of the pain that you are
Hmm.
willing to accept. I think it's one of those things that I almost take as a good sign, even though it makes me sad. It's this bittersweetness because I am happy because it means I've experienced something that's really impacted me and something that I want to carry with me in some form for longer than just the moments I am
Yeah.
in it. Um, and so oftentimes I will not immediately replay a title just so that I can like absorb everything or absorb that initial playthrough. But I do often schedule kind of these annual replays of certain titles that I love. I've talked about Undertale in
Hmm.
particular. Final Fantasy VII is another one where I will replay those games on sort of this periodic basis where I know it won't get like tired for me, but it allows me to reappreciate and like revisit these themes and worlds that I love so much. um I feel like this list is getting longer though, because now with again, I keep mentioning In Stars and Time. We're going to be playing it next year probably because I'm going to be replaying it next year for fun, and I want to drag you all into the loops with me. Um, like that's another game where I think I'm going to add it to my replay list because there is, I think, to your point, so much to discover when you do know some of the arcs that are coming, and you can prep yourself to really appreciate them in a way that
Yeah.
you couldn't when it was a surprise. And I think both ways of experiencing it are wonderful. Um, but yeah, the sadness is for me really comes from knowing that it is the only time that you can experience your first time. I think that is where the core of like that sadness comes from, is like this is the last first time that I will have with this game. And I think as is generally caused me to savor the games that I
Oh,
play
good.
more. It's funny that you talk about like beating games
Hmm.
more quickly. I found myself turning sort of the opposite direction, especially in the last 2 years, partially because of this club.
Hey.
But I think also I have found myself realizing this idea of savoring games really helps me just appreciate them more fully and feel like I don't get as
Hmm.
sad, or at least like, yeah, as sad when I'm done playing them, because I really do feel like I've gotten the most I can out of them upon this first playthrough. Um,
We'll
so
see. I
yeah.
might feel this way about Baldur's Gate when it's all said and done. This like 6 month
Yeah, I was
journey with
gonna
these characters.
say, I'm really curious to see what happens after Baldur's Gate because this is the game you have spent the most time on
I think
by
it like
far.
it was probably Elden Ring before this and Breath of the Wild before that, and this is certainly surpassed and taken the cake. One last like question though: do
Yeah.
you get the sads when you finish books?
Yes. Although I feel like it's not usually to the
Mm,
degree that games will make me feel. Like I get post-book sadness for sure. But usually it's kind of one of those things where I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to miss reading that series. I'm going to miss this world. I don't know what to read next." And that's kind
yeah.
of the
Hmm.
extent of it. I think with games, just due to the immersion that games allow for, I feel it almost to a deeper level. And I think this is sort of just maybe
Sure.
my personality, because I feel like this sense of like the sort of more like empathic feelings that I have like in games. I really don't like doing things that hurt the
Yeah.
characters. Like talking about Undertale, I will never do a thing that like hurts the characters in Undertale. In OneShot, feeling like taking 15 minutes to decide what decision to
Hmm.
make for Nico at
Hmm.
the end of the game. So I think also I tend to be a person that puts a lot more emotion into that kind of stuff. Maybe more than some other folks, but
Oh, that's
yeah.
That's fascinating. I think there's only been 2 books that I can think of where I've had that, and, the first is the Broken Earth trilogy, by Jemison, if anyone hasn't read that,
Mm,
but, like, that's one where I finished it and I was like, "I'll never read that for the first time again," and I was like, "Wow, what a ride." And the other is,
yeah.
The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I reread that after my pup passed this last year. Like, it is just one of those books that, like,
Mm,
I feel it, and I've probably read or reread that book 6 times since it came out. Like, I just love it. So, yeah,
mhm.
thank you all for, taking this emotional ride with us, and, intellectual ride. Any kinda housekeeping notes, Jenny,
Yes.
for us as we're, moving on? Any important announcements we wanna make?
Yeah, very important announcement. So, if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, you should, because if you did, you would have already known our next game that we're jumping into, but we're announcing it here on the podcast. We are going to, oh, also, if you want to subscribe to the newsletter, you can go to
Yeah, you should do
geeksandgrounds.com to subscribe. I should probably,
that.
yeah, I should probably say where to go, but after shaming you, I'm so sorry for not subscribing. Let's
Yeah,
provide
yeah, yeah.
solutions, shall we? So we are going to be playing Thirsty Suitors for the month of February. I figured, it's a game all about maybe not quite romance, but what can happen as a result of a lot of maybe not so great endings to relationships and what happens when you are forced to face maybe the poor decisions that you've made in romantic relationships
Oh
in the
boy.
past. Thirsty Suitors. Thirsty Suitors is made by Outer Loop Games. They are a studio, I think, based in Canada. I'm not sure. I should have looked this up. But they have made games like Falcon Age, which is a great game about fighting like
Mm.
colonialism in this wonderful fictional area where you get to like control a falcon. But Thirsty Suitors, really quickly, just to read the Steam description for you. Thirsty Suitors is a surreal story-driven game which throws turn-based RPG mechanics, skating, and over-the-top cooking mechanics together in a spicy fusion. But this isn't a dating sim. It's a breakup
Oh,
simulator. Battle your exes, disappoint your parents, and find
oh
yourself.
boy.
Um, it's gonna be good. So we are playing this game. The playthrough guide is available. We'll fill it in as we go with the timeline and the questions and everything that we discuss. But if you're wanting to get prepped for next week, um, pick up the game. We'll officially start playing it on. Let's see, because the month doesn't quite. We'll officially start playing and talking about it on Wednesday, January 31st. So that's going to be kind of like that kickoff. I'm super excited.
Yeesh.
So yeah.
I hope we get to hear some breakup stories as we get into this.
Oh, we're gonna have to talk about some awkward dating moments. I hope
Oh
you all get to
boy.
share any awkward just relationship shenanigans. It doesn't have to even be dating. If you're just like, I got some real awkward stories of just different like friendships, maybe because relationships, doesn't have to be romantic. But yeah, I'm excited. This is a game that also really emphasizes like I believe it's I know it's South Asian. I'm trying to remember I think it's
Hmm.
Sri Lankan. I'm not entirely sure. I'll have to look this up, but it's really emphasizes South Asian cultures. So kind of like with
Oh
Venba, throwing
yeah.
back to that, we're gonna experience like a really and actually
Keeping
Space from
down,
the
yeah.
Unbound as well. We're gonna experience a very specific like cultural perspective that I'm really excited about that we do not often get to see in
Oh,
games.
rad.
So
I'm
yeah.
so excited to dig in. Uh, well, we
Yeah.
hope you look to join us in Thirsty Suitors throughout the month of February. Thank you so much for hanging out with us as we talked about One Shot, Two Shot, and AKA
AKA
Solstice.
Solstice.
I guess I should probably use that name at least once today. We love having this community and having all of you engage with us. If you find yourselves dealing with the post game sads or even the post game bitters, just have 6 cups of coffee and get the post game jitters. Thanks.
Oh,
Bye.
hey. Don't consult your doctors. Or maybe, actually, no,
Do
do consult
consult
your
your
doctors
doctors.
when consuming that much caffeine.